joins us here, of course, to bring us more. Of course, thank you so much for your time, Professor de Vos. Perhaps let's begin here. You've previously written about how difficult a decision this would be for the National Commissioner, whether he would have to incarcerate Zuma or not. You actually wrote an article following the Concord decision. The question now is whether a way could be found or ought to be found to spare Zuma from further incarceration. What's your take on the announcement made this morning?
Well, what happened now is that the decision really was taken out of the hands of the commissioner because the president has exercised his power, as the previous case said, to remit sentences of Mr. Zuma and several thousand other people who are in prison. So that there are two issues. The one is this legally tenable? The answer is yes. So unless procedurally there was a problem and they acted irrationally in coming to the decision, the president, it will stand. It will be difficult to challenge this in court. That is a different question of whether this is a wise decision, whether it's in the interest of justice or upholding the rule of law. That's a much more complicated issue, which is not exactly the same as the legal issue involved.
Yeah. You've also previously written that as you read the Act, nothing in it prohibits the National Commissioner from considering the time spent by Mr. Zuma on unlawful medical parole as a factor to justify his immediate release from prison by placing him under correctional supervision. What processes would need to follow in that regard, and the considerations which come with Section 757A of the Act to place offenders serving sentences of less than 24 months under correctional supervision?
Well, there is a process prescribed by the Act for that, obviously, which also requires then the commissioner, if he makes that decision, to decide what conditions should be imposed, and then the person who's let out in that way are not really free because they are still under supervision, but they can spend it, say, at home, and the restrictions are imposed to say you cannot leave the magisterial district or whatever the case might be. All that is now fallen by the wayside, of course, because of the remission of the sentences of Mr. Zuma and many other prisoners. So the commissioner now, that parts of the legislation are now not applicable anymore to Mr. Zuma.
Do you consider the announcement from today to be based in law or politics? I mean, that really there's greater concern over what Zuma's incarceration could do.
Well, I think it's obviously both, because there was obviously a desire to make sure that Mr. Zuma doesn't go back to prison. There might be many political and policy and personal considerations for that. And they try to find a legal way that is not going to be easy to challenge in court. And I think they found one because we have the strange thing in our law that we inherited really from the UK, and that you also find in other constitutions, where the president can just undo basically the sentences imposed by a court of law. That it's an anomaly, but it is in the Constitution, and so that is that.
Is there any belief that this decision could set any sort of precedent?
Well, this is not the first time that the president of the country has used his powers to remit the sentences of prisoners. In the democratic era, Mr. Mandela, shortly after elected, remitted the sentence of women who have been spending time in prison and who had children at home in certain categories of women. That was also challenged before the Constitutional Court. So in a general sense, there's nothing wrong with it. The problem here is, of course, that Mr. Zuma has been sent to prison because of his full frontal attack on the rule of law, on the legal system. And so the argument would be that this sends a signal, or this doesn't hold the line, if you want, to make to enforce sort of the rule of law and to enforce the principle that people should really not get away with trying to collapse the whole system, the democratic system and the legal system.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for weighing in on this discussion. Constitutional law expert, Professor Pierre de Vos, thank you for your time. Let's remind